Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and sort of figure out the future of buildings and all the technology that goes in it. The panelists of Monday Live are listed on mondaylive.org. You wonder who we are. Most important point here is that the views expressed on this show are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and comments in chat on the Zoom chat. And also to note that this deck is also available on mondaylive.org. So just a programming note, I'm on my mobile phone, so because I'm having some technology problems here, so please forgive me if things go a little weird. But slide Ken, please. Ken?
Oops, there we go.
Go backwards. That's okay, it's fine. Yeah, so our theme for this month is understanding smart building owners. We've had three really lively discussions so far, and hopefully we're going to continue that today with our guest today. Slide again, Ken. So our normal agenda, we'll just have a normal chit chat, and then we'll have our guest, Blake Hyde, really have a discussion about owners and their needs and their perspectives. And hopefully some interesting discussion. But before that, I'm going to ask Ken to click and hand it over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Anto. Of course, we've got our August issue online, which is all about preparing for AHR Expo. And as you heard on some of the chatter there, some of the programs are starting to come together. We've certainly got the skeleton outline. I think what we need now is to get the names of all of these sessions, and we're starting to do that, and we're starting to assemble the people. So we're really pleased with how that's going. Our September issue is connecting and combining communities. Kind of is a little bit of a kick that kind of fits right in with the August theme and kind of continues on. Our industry is rapidly growing, and it's fragmented by social media, and we need to appear on our website in the world as a story of combined connection industry. Some of the words that we saw falling already in for the September issue is separate communities are still innovating their own fragments by breaking apart time. They're building new montages. So we are making progress, but not seeing the beautiful picture painted to management from outside articles. So I think we have to do a better job of our storytelling, and there was some focus on that last month. One of our sponsors, Building IoT, has written this article, A Guide to Understanding Building Management Protocols. And I think that's the type of information we need. We need to turn more into presenting how all of these pieces fit together. And I loved Anno's slide last Monday that showed us, the Lego pieces, and until we tell a story, it's pretty hard to figure out what it is you're looking at. And I think we all arrive selling our pieces or selling our Lego blocks without really doing a good job of telling what all these Lego blocks do when they're put together, or what is the big picture. Another one that caught my attention is a lot of folks are not buying into this AI and learning machine learning technology, and they think it's going to go away if they ignore it. I'm not so sure about that. And this was an interesting connection here, is that the Pacific Northwest Labs and Passive Logic are partnering in an effort to develop a deep artificial intelligence for predictive building controls. And that's being funded by US DOE. So I think that's kind of an interesting indication that there are some changes afoot, and we're going to have to pay a greater attention to AI and machine learning. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you. Can you advance the slide? Over to John.
Yeah, Yeah, a couple of stories relating to the themes we're been talking about for the past couple of years. So I thought this was interesting because I think we've hit on this. You know, where are we in return to the office, right? We hear companies going back, making people go back. We have people who aren't going back. And this article said the answer is the same. Nobody's on the same page, right? You have evidence of both. Some people are going back, some people aren't going back. And related to that, under that, from PropMoto, AT&T workers signed a petition to continue working from home. Thought that was interesting. Also on this same topic, and of course, the reason this matters is it's going to drive business opportunities in the built environment, upgrades of facilities, et cetera. On another topic, one of the things we've talked about is we're in a way a silo that the greater society doesn't understand the complexities of buildings and building systems, et cetera. So I thought this was really interesting that CES has a whole theme this year of technology to support a more sustainable world. So when the Consumer Electronics Show starts talking about it, maybe it means that the message is penetrating a little further. So that's what I have this week.
John, interesting there with the return to the office, we're on the same page, but it's be interesting to know whether it's the employer or the employees that either want to stay away or return to the office.
Yeah, it probably is driven by employees, but if you go into depth on that, you'll see there are organizations who have said, we don't need you to return, right? And then there are organizations that are trying to make people return. So I'd say it's both. There's also people who want to go back to the office, right? Not everybody wants to stay home, right? But there's so many different use cases and examples, and especially around commuting challenges and stuff. So, but certainly no universal answer.
No, for sure.
And then to that point, Rite Aid just completed their brand new corporate headquarters. And they have told people, even though they've completed it and they've tricked it out and whatever, you don't have to come. Just continue working out of the house.
Wow.
To your point, John. So
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, John. Any other thoughts?
I got one for you. So as this year has progressed, we have seen challenges with respect to supply chain. And are we out of it yet? No. But not to try to make this worse, but over the weekend, I had a long discussion with a couple folks who are in that, and they represent component manufacturers and stuff from Asia and in China. And one of the interesting things that came out is that China is undergoing a major water challenge. That's why I was asked earlier. And the Yangtze River is starting to drop. And the water that's used in component manufacturing is now, they're talking about rationing it or whatever the case is. So just as we were sort of gotten 1 foot back out on the challenge as far as supply chain, I'm not sure what's going to happen if China and other parts of Asia really go to a ration perspective as far as their manufacturing process. So something to keep our eyes on.
Mark, that's interesting. So we've been pursuing, we have a customer that uses Raspberry Pis, a little, compute modules in particular. And they had just heard that one of the causes of the shortages of Raspberry Pis, they've been running about a 52-week lead time, almost a year lead time, was due to exactly what you just said, the water rationing. But now there's been so much rain here this summer for the last 8 weeks or so that the restrictions have been lifted. Production is now ramping up, and there should be relief coming shortly in terms of availability of those. Now, I think
that's here though, Tracy, right? That's
no,
North America?
Taiwan. Taiwan.
Got it. Got
Yep.
it.
I don't know if that applies to China,
Yeah.
but Taiwan at least.
Interesting. I've got, so that is interesting, that Yangtze River, oh boy. Couple thoughts, Mark, to your earlier comment, or was it you? I was talking to a guy earlier today. We were talking about working from home. So he was an early adopter. He was a guy whose wife had a big old job. And so like in 2018, 2019, he decided to go work to be an individual contributor and said, hey, but I want to work from home. So he accepted a big pay cut to work from home. Now the whole world worked from home and he's stuck with his little pay cut. I thought that was the second thing is I've been seeing some talk online and so forth about AI and ML. So John, you'll appreciate this because you understand the distinction between the two. Often we do conflate AI and ML, and they're two different things. And AI really hasn't taken a foot in this industry so much, but the ML piece is much more. I don't know. It's moved forward quite a bit more than AI. So it'll be interesting to see that AI thing happen. But it is important to understand there's a distinction there. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, any other news or thoughts that anybody wants to contribute?
Yeah, so John was mentioning about CES trying to raise some visibility with its annual show. And I just think back 10 years ago or so when I went to that show, they were pushing home automation the big way. You know, all your major home automation vendors were there at the show. So, you know, it's not automation in buildings, at least at the home level, is nothing new. So I'm not sure how successful they're going to be, John. And you know, and I would, it's still to this day when I meet somebody and they ask me what I do, I still am having to say, you know, smart controls or computers for running buildings, think HVAC. So then, oh, okay, I get it, right? But no, you know, if the person's like in finance or a lawyer or something that's unrelated to buildings and technology, they have no clue about what goes into running a modern building.
Yeah, but bringing focus to sustainability, you know, that's certainly wind at the sails as opposed to against them, right? How much it'll help is another question, but I thought it was interesting that it's on their, you know, headline announcement.
That's interesting. So Steve, I used to live in Asia and there was this Scottish guy, like just pure Scotsman. He was a guy who was the chief engineer on ocean-going major super vessels, like, you know, transport vehicle vessels. And he told me 30 years ago, the whole idea of being the chief engineer, which is a pretty big job on one of these super tankers, and he equated it back in the day, and I didn't snap to it, to buildings. He's like, it's like running a big building. You want it to operate completely on a standalone, whatever. And he equated buildings 30 years ago to super tankers. Isn't that weird?
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's random.
I have a buddy who was went to Maine Maritime Academy and was an engineer, you know, an engineer on big vessels like that, Bill. And he equated it to a floating factory with apartments, right? Because there's living spaces and you know, mess hall and all the food services, but then there's you know, this whole process end of it in terms of tankers and moving oil on and off and all that kind of stuff as well, let alone the engine room, of course. But
Yep.
Okay, shall we move on then? Ken, slide. Okay, so understanding smart building owners. So I'm going to bring on to the panel is our guest, Blake Hyde. I can tap this button. It's the first time I'm actually hosting a webinar on a mobile, and it's actually so far been quite good. Hopefully working okay for you guys. But Blake, are you on?
I'm here now. Thanks. Can you hear me all right?
There you go. There's Blake. So yeah, great. Why don't I ask Blake if you can just sort of introduce yourself, who you're with, and what your responsibilities there, and then we have a few questions that we'd like to get from to ask you. So over to you, Blake. It's great to have you here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anto. Appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Blake Hyde. I'm with Cadillac Fairview as manager of smart buildings. So along with my teammates and the director of our group, we manage the smart building portfolio and strategy for Cadillac Fairview, which is a corporate real estate owner operator, primarily operating in Canada with over 35 million in assets, as well as with international investments overseas in a multitude of different continents and countries. So my role is primarily associated with the delivery of smart building technology throughout the portfolio, as well as the establishment of our smart building strategy for years to come, as well as the consolidation of many of our different initiatives currently underway. So between myself and my counterparts across the organization, we're helping to basically digitize and transform the Cadillac Fairview portfolio to be a data-driven operations rather than what we were working with before.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Blake. So the first sort of question we'd like to ask is, what we're trying to do this month is really trying to understand what happens within a building owner organization, and specifically those such organizations that understand or have infrastructure and resources in place for basically what you're doing. Right. So I think we'd love to get sort of a bit of an understanding of what the dynamics are internally in terms of resources, the sort of support that you're getting. Do you get support from the highest level, or is it a fight? It's what does it feel like to be within Cadillac Fairview with this role?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think to start, I mean, obviously everything comes down from organizational leadership. So we're fortunate in that the leadership within Cadillac Fairview have a prerogative around digital transformation and disruptive innovation to drive, business value. So not necessarily knowing exactly what that translates to technology-wise, they do have that intention in mind in terms of how the organization is going to move forward. And so they give a lot of freedom to us to identify what those objectives look like in terms of translating our business outcomes into technology solutions. I would say also we're fortunate in that we have, because of the breadth of our organization and the many stakeholders that we have internally, we built a really strong foundation technology-wise for connectivity and networks. And so we've identified an opportunity where we no longer have to overhaul everything in order to achieve some of our data-driven operational goals. We have an opportunity now to unlock that and sort of drive use cases rather than driving modernization initiatives. So all that to say, I mean, I think the COVID landscape has helped accelerate a lot of what we're trying to achieve here as well. And so there was, in terms of asset resiliency and things of that nature, a lot of the smart building initiatives needed to support asset resiliency and bring us into the future to be able to be adaptive and more so than reactive, has helped accelerate our program as well. I think that in tandem with the ESG movement that we have right now in terms of green technologies and ensuring that we have sustainable and socially conscious organizations has driven a lot of this as well. So there's a strong focus on occupant well-being and satisfaction. There's a strong focus on energy performance and building performance. There's a strong emphasis on reducing the kinds of things that we typically consume in a building, whether that's fossil fuels or natural gas or any type of resources needed to run the building. And so whereas before there was a lot of manual intervention required, a lot of auditing required, the idea now is to help accelerate some of those ESG goals using technology and data as well, so we become a proactive organization rather than a reactive organization.
So I'm going to open it up to the panelists, but just one sort of clarification for this. How long has this sort of attitude within Cadillac Fairview been on data-centric buildings? Is this relatively new? You mentioned COVID. Was it triggered by COVID? Or how far back did this all start?
Good question. So it started before I arrived at Cadillac Fairview, probably 5 or more years ago. I think there's a strong emphasis on automation and standardization across the portfolio in terms of how our systems, our IT systems are deployed. And then I think there was a realization shortly thereafter that we had an opportunity to centralize and integrate a lot of these different data streams to draw actionable insights and enable some of our, desired use cases, which at the time were primarily around building performance and energy, but have now transpired to be much more, occupant centric and building performance more holistically as well. So to answer that question, I guess more so about 5 years approximately that this initiative has been underway. And I think a lot of that was setting the foundation originally, and now we're able to accelerate that to say, how can technology be layered on top? What can we put in there as an application layer to sort of further our vision?
That's wonderful. Opening up to the panel, to the group.
Yeah, Blake, I have a question. Is the incoming occupiers and people like that, what's their expectations of a smart building? Are they demanding, things like indoor air quality and, space optimization or visitor management? I don't know. Are they expecting that these days or not?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on the age of the asset and the level of sophistication for the client. A lot of times the clients just want, to make sure that the building's operating, that their employees are going to be comfortable and that they can get safely in and out of the building without disruption, right? So those are the kind of the fundamentals that are being asked for. Some of the more sophisticated clients who have ESG and smart building initiatives from a corporate level are asking for a bit more. So connectivity is first and foremost. They want that redundant connection. They want to be able to access their servers, and they want the level of, infrastructure in the building to support their connectivity needs. But more so even than that, there's a lot of ESG requirements from a corporate level right now of the occupied space. So many of the large organizations in the States have full ESG and smart building or smart office strategies in place to be able to achieve those corporate objectives. And so they're looking to us as the owners and landlords to say, how can you give us the data to be able to support this, either this use case or the data to be able to influence our ESG measurements or energy or space performance requirements. So in that way, we're becoming an enabler for their own initiatives rather than providing them with the specific technologies.
Okay, and is there one particular thing that, is the most common requirement? Is it energy or is it indoor air quality? Is the one particular thing that they're always asking for?
It's a great question. I mean, in my experience, the primary driver right now is around the energy side. A lot of investments now are related to green investments, so the whole GREB score and everything like that. And so they want to understand how their space is performing from a consumption perspective and how they can implement opportunities to reduce their consumption. And so, we're providing them the air, we're providing them the electricity, we're sub-metering their space. And so they want to know, on a granular level, how that's being utilized so they can implement, optimization initiatives.
Blake, Mark Peacock, a couple questions for you. Is when did your organization actually start their smart building journey, I guess, or however you want to do it? And on a scale of 1 to 10, or I'll use the baseball analogy, what inning do you think you guys are at in your play here?
That's a great question. So, I would say, based on my limited exposure to the history of the smart building program, it seems as though 5 years is approximately when it started. It wouldn't have been referred to as smart buildings back then, mostly around energy optimization and building performance. It wouldn't have been identified as smart building. I would say we associated that label with it about 2 years ago, wherein the actual smart building group was formed underneath our corporate responsibility, environmental sustainability, and technology arm. So I would say 2 years, it's fallen under that definition. A lot of those 2 years were setting the foundation, getting the right resources in place, establishing a strategy for the deployment of technology and what that really means for our future. In terms of what inning we're in, that's a difficult one for me to say. I think we're accelerating quite a bit compared to where we were 2 years ago, or even during the pandemic. Now that we have people returning to offices, we have growing expectations, we have a new workplace environment that predicates a more agile approach. So I would say, I would like to say we're about the 6th inning, and we're about to be able to launch a lot more of our initiatives and consolidate. But I don't know if that's an accurate statement, because there's been a lot of foundational elements put in place with respect to sustainability programs, energy programs, building optimization programs. And I know those are kind of point solutions right now, but in terms of our smart building vision is a consolidated, holistic approach to all of those things. And so maybe that's why I say sixth inning rather than seventh or eighth.
Mhm. And the second question is this: while any business runs into barriers, and especially when you want to adopt new technologies, new solutions into a place where traditionally people have taken the environment of a building, the comfort or whatever for granted, what is, in your opinion, what is the one major barrier that you have seen and maybe continually see as you are, continuing to move forward to go to the seventh inning, the eighth inning, and so forth?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there's two aspects of that. There's active initiatives underway, which need to be successfully rolled out in order for us to be able to, advance our roadmap. And then there's the preliminary aspect where we need to develop the business case. So I guess if we take a step back here and we look at the business case side of things, I think the challenging part for us right now is to be able to define tangible ROI for outcomes that aren't directly associated with the typical things that you use to measure ROI, like energy efficiency, equipment performance, asset lifecycle. Those are all still critical aspects, but in terms of being able to deploy, the vast majority of smart building use cases, a lot of those are intangible outcomes that are difficult to assign metrics to. And so when we're talking about, listen, we want to deploy indoor air quality in our space, we can talk about how we can optimize our ventilation system to be able to reduce energy or whatever that may be. There's no tangible way for us to say, our occupants are, the air quality is better, therefore our occupants are happier, therefore we're receiving this much more value. It's more so indirect outcomes like improved tenant relations, less frequent turnover of leased space. And so I think that's a challenge as well, to be able to really encompass the benefits that a lot of the smart building technology can provide in a single business case is a challenge. And then if we talk about once we have a program in place, and we have a number of them in place right now, I would say change management is the second biggest hurdle in the grand scheme of things, primarily because challenging the conventional and especially in a lot of existing assets is very challenging. People have built 20-year, 30-year careers running a building, and they know it like the back of their hand. And so when you come in and tell them, hey, we're going to use data to optimize the building and reduce your workload and make you more productive, that to them is a threat to their livelihood. And so there's sometimes some adversity to that. And that could be anything. That could be optimized cleaning schedules, that could be optimized HVAC performance, ramp up, ramp down, maintenance schedules, any of those things that have typically been done based on, knocking on the rooftop unit and listening to the sound of the fan is now being done using vibration sensors. And so implementing that side of things has been a pretty substantial barrier for us in terms of national rollouts and sort of standardizing all of our operational processes.
Do you mean that with your own internal staff or your tenants or vendors?
I would say more so internally on that front, like our building operations teams. At one point in time, Cadillac Fairview was a bit of a separated group of portfolios under a single company where we had Western, Central, Eastern, and et cetera. And that 5 or 6 years ago, they were centralized into a single national operations model. And although it's been 5 or more years since then, there still exist like previous operations models and staff who were there who did their own thing. And so when we come in and say, hey, we're gonna standardize this and we're gonna layer this technology on top so that you can stop looking at your CO2 levels or doing these kinds of internal audits, it's just gonna be there for you. A lot of times that's met with adversity. That's all.
So Blake, Steve Fay here. Really appreciate you being on today's panel. This is having you and your being able to represent a major commercial real estate venture is fantastic for us. One of the things we often talk about in our industry from an acquisition of technology perspective is the fact so much of it goes through a capital process. So it's part of a new building, or maybe it's a retrofit for a building that has a system that's 20 years old and has to be replaced. And so that's where the money comes from, is through a capital cycle. We're now, experiencing strong desire where technology is concerned to go to much more of a managed service or a subscription model. and which then hits this pain point of OpEx versus CapEx. And because in the facilities budget, there's rarely a lot of line items for OpEx, or they try to keep it as low as historically, they try to keep it as minimal as possible. So I'd love to see you comment on that and what your experience has been and what kind of challenges you're facing in that area.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, I'm sure we're not the only ones, based on your sentiment there, that are experiencing that issue as well, which is to say that, to be successful in a business, you need to increase your profits and reduce your capital spend. So I think from that perspective, it is challenging, both from an initial procurement perspective, putting them funds in place to pay for the system or the technology or the equipment up front. But then, as you said, maintaining operating costs is a strong aspect of our business model. And so when we tell our properties, you should reduce your operational spend, or you can only increase it by this much, and then we come in and say, also, we're going to add X dollars per square foot for the smart building platform, it definitely creates a bit of challenge in that respect.
Yeah.
And so I think it comes back to our ROI discussion a few minutes ago, which is, how do we offset our operational costs with savings? And a lot of times there's the energy aspect of that, but energy can only go so far. So when we talk about if there's already energy reduction practices or FDD in place in the building, and we want to talk about how we're going to improve the occupant experience or reduce operator workload or reduce dependency on third-party service contractors, all those things are excellent, but they don't have tangible ROI. And so when we say we're going to add 20 cents per square foot to your operating model for the next 3 years, they're like, okay, well, how's that going to offset my operating model? And then we don't really have an answer for that. So that's one of the challenges that we certainly face with the deployment of large-scale smart building programs. And so I think in that respect, when I say we're in the sixth inning, it's also a lot about validation too. So we've made some assumptions about the current initiatives that we have underway, and we're making sure to validate that the outcomes, both tangible and intangible, are providing the value that we anticipated that they would. And so, I think it's a stepping stone towards the next phase to be able to say, look, these initiatives worked. We were able to achieve exactly the outcomes we expected and more. And so let's take a gamble on this next one, or maybe not a gamble, but an educated risk on this next one to show that we can, further that vision even more.
Yeah. Sort of as a follow-up, from an energy savings perspective, you can run, hard calculations, whether it's a piece of equipment you're replacing or upgrading, or it's better control sequences, all that you can run calculations to estimate how much energy you're going to reduce. But the labor side, do you actively try to look at how you can reduce your costs to operate the facility from an ROI perspective?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's reducing costs so much as it is optimizing them. I think the prerogative internally isn't to reduce the amount of staff we have working on a building. It's to make sure that their day-to-day operations are more effective. And so there is a downstream result of that, which is to say that we might have greater asset life cycle from reduced likelihood of failure of equipment because we're proactively replacing parts instead of just waiting for them to fail. And so certainly there's that aspect of it, but I think in terms of resourcing costs, it's less so about reducing the amount of resources we need and more so about optimizing their day-to-day.
Other questions
I had a
from the
question.
group?
I will add, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Blake, finish.
No, okay, I was just going to say, one of the other challenges that you mentioned with respect to operating costs as well versus capital versus OpEx is that the traditional sort of methodology for making sure that your building is competitive and resilient would be to upgrade legacy systems, right? And so now we have the challenge to say, do we upgrade our BAS to be, full BACnet IP distributed controls, or do we maybe integrate with the head-end system and provide a more supervisory system from that perspective? And so it's a challenge to maybe overcome those traditional ways of thinking to say, what's the best approach here? Do we need a new BAS? Do we need a new elevator control system? Or do we have the ability to layer on an integrated controls platform to be able to achieve the same outcomes, but maybe for less money? So I just wanted to add that point as well, which is that there certainly still is a case for change for upgrading legacy systems to be more modern, but then you have to balance that out with, to what extent is that actually going to be able to unlock value for you more than what you already have in place, maybe beyond energy savings.
Yeah, so my question is kind of along those lines. I hear a number of things you're saying related to what you would have considered, facilities management, energy management, right? And yet there's these new, if you will, softer or different types of, workspace experience, greenhouse gas reporting, those types of things that are, can you comment on, did this come out of a growth upward out of facilities, or a kind of new strategies and awareness downward from the C-suite to achieve this? Because that's one of the things we talk about is, a lot of the stuff we do and the cool stuff we can do, we're locked in the boiler room and nobody understands. They don't know what we're talking about, right? But to get where you're going, you've really got to have both of those meet, right? So maybe you just comment a little bit about that if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I would say of those two that you just mentioned, the driving it down from the C-suite is probably the most impactful in terms of how we've been able to deploy a lot of these experiential use cases. So right now, Cadillac Fairview is launching a workplace experience app across our portfolio to sort of improve the day-to-day of our office occupants and improve the ability for our properties to communicate with them, more digital amenities, a lot of great aspects there. And again, that's one of those things where we, a traditional facilities management approach wouldn't have worked because there's no tangible, direct ROI from that result. And so it was more of a leadership objective to say, we want to differentiate ourselves in the industry. We want to be that go-to workplace experience where, leasing our space provides your employees with more productivity, more fun, more beneficial to lease from. And so that was an example of exactly what you just mentioned, where it was a corporate objectives from the C-suite coming down and saying, let's deploy this smart technology. So it certainly comes from both sides.
Yeah, so that term is great, a leadership objective, and I guess a lot of us on this group, bemoan, why isn't it a leadership objective to have the most efficient buildings in the world, right? Like that one has to be proven by ROI, but this one can go with a leadership objective, and we struggle to try to figure out how to explain what we do in both of those audiences, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from one of the things that we look at when we're just either looking at industry trends or trying to prioritize certain smart building technologies is how does it translate all the way back up through our smart building objectives to our business drivers, and then up again to that leadership or organizational objectives. And I think at every stage it gets distilled down more and more into exact requirements. Like we start off with an organizational objective, which might be operational excellence. Now, what does operational excellence mean to smart building technology? Doesn't mean a lot yet, but if we translate that down to cost optimization or risk mitigation or sustainability, energy reduction, we can draw clear outcomes there in terms of what technology can enable that. And so from that perspective, our whole prerogative on the smart building team is just to enable organizational objectives, either directly or indirectly.
Cool.
So,
Hey, Blake,
go ahead.
Just curiosity, Blake, if you don't mind. Bill Bain, Tossy Box, nice to meet you. Just swag, I guess, here. Of your portfolio, what percentage do you think has IP-based systems, controls in it?
100%, I would say at this point.
Wow. Well, Ryan said you guys are ahead of the game. It sounds like you might be at least beyond season.
Yeah, my infrastructure, data, and technology counterparts are really strong in that regard. They've established a full connectivity standard and minimum requirements for converged network across the entire portfolio. And so, as I was saying at the start of the call, I mean, I'm fortunate because the foundational elements that need to be put in place to enable smart building technology are already there. So I don't have to factor in a converged network or additional network switches or a whole new POP room in order to be able to get data out of the VAS. It's already there for me. So I'm fortunate in that respect.
So let me extend on the technology question around cloud computing. How much of your data is now going out to the cloud, and what kind of data, if any?
Great question. So I would say right now, it appears as though most of the data that's going out to the cloud through Amazon or Azure is on the business side of things, so like marketing, finance, things of that nature.
Yeah.
The operational side is a bit different in that we have some BAS in place, some elevator systems in place that are accessible via the cloud, but they're not necessarily standardized or integrated together just yet. So our intention long term over the next little while is to make that digital transition from on-site servers specifically to a hybrid model where we have that redundant on-site server in place, but we can also access that information via the cloud to either run our analytics or automations or whatever we want to do with that.
Blake, what's your cybersecurity posture on all these things? Jim Lee from Symmetrics.
Hi, Jim. Good question. I'm not necessarily the expert on cybersecurity that can speak to our exact practices, but we do have a very strong mandate in terms of air gaps and partitioning of our operational systems versus our IT systems. I know, having been through it a number of times with respect to the deployment of a number of IoT platforms, but there's a lot of steps in place with respect to cybersecurity review, InfoSec review, and architecture review to see how that fits into our existing cybersecurity environment. So there's a pretty strong foundation there in terms of making sure that we're not opening up Cadillac Fairview to any liabilities when we deploy any kind of software within the environment. And from that perspective as well, I mean, right now from an IoT perspective, at the gateway level, we're trying to keep primary connections would be cellular. And so rather than adding a direct connection to our IT rooms within our office spaces or in our base building areas, we try to use cellular connectivity where possible so we can connect back to whatever cloud service without having to actually directly connect to our base building systems. But on that same note, obviously, when it comes to OT, like operational technologies in the building, obviously you can't have your BAS going out through cellular connections. So we do have a pretty strong OT backhaul network there with quite a bit in place. But again, I'm not necessarily the expert on the cybersecurity side to tell you what we have in place, but I know it's fairly stringent.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Blake, can you speak to the?
No.
I was going to say, can you speak to the sort of the relationship between IT and OT within Cadillac Fairview? Is that an issue at all, or I imagine not?
Not at all. I would say we have a pretty symbiotic relationship, I guess, from that perspective. I mean, they're an enabler for us in that whenever we need to deploy something, they support us from either an enterprise architecture perspective, a connectivity perspective, or an infrastructure perspective. So in that way, we work together really well. I think it's about finding a balance between what their requirements are for data storage requirements, overall enterprise architecture, ontologies, naming standards, et cetera, and sort of unifying that with what we want to do from that smart building perspective. Because I think the way that data is handled from a traditional IT perspective is a lot different than it's handled from an operations perspective, because this is real-time exchange of data between siloed systems. And so we have a vision in mind in terms of how those are going to communicate, and our IT group maybe says, no, those are partition systems. We have VLANs for that. There's a lot of different nuances around how to make that data transfer successful. And so, we work through those challenges, but not in a way that really conflicts with one another, in a way that making sure that we are successful and scalable across a whole enterprise.
Right.
Blake, this is Tracy Markey from Ingenuity Systems. You may have already mentioned this and I missed it, but from an operations standpoint, is this all of your buildings centrally monitored from one location, or within building, each location has its own facilities group that monitors? Or just talk a little bit about the operations part of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So as I mentioned before, we're coming out of a sort of isolated operations model from our past sort of the way that our buildings were run. And so it's still a bit of a hybrid in that we have some buildings or some portfolios that are managed centrally from a single location, and then we can monitor and sort of run the buildings from one location. And in other cases, we have on-site staff that run the building specifically for that site only. We do have enterprise visibility over most systems in that our national operations group can access the head-end supervisory software for like access control, all those different kinds of security systems. But we still have a number of different BAS, a number of different elevator manufacturers, a number of different fire and life safety systems. And so although we have remote access to those, we don't necessarily have enterprise visibility yet. And that's something that we're trying to work towards as well.
And you had said the main goal is, or the outcome that you're looking for more than anything, maybe, is energy savings. Did I hear that correctly?
That's certainly a critical pillar of it. I mean, Cadillac Fairview prides itself on having really strong net zero and decarbonization goals. So energy reduction and reduction of consumption of natural gas and other types of fossil fuels is very important to our long-term strategy. From my perspective, again, the technology is supposed to be an enabler of our organizational objectives, right? So energy reduction is certainly an aspect of that, but operational efficiency and client experience are also two other very critical components to that vision.
So Blake, you've painted a really sort of interesting and informative picture of what goes on in Cadillac Fairview. So Thank you for that. What do you need? What does Cadillac Fairview need as far as technology, or what doesn't exist out there, or what is it frustrating that you can't find either a vendor or a service or any kind of type of thing that will actually make your progress a lot faster?
Or add,
That's a great question.
I'd add wish list. What's your wish list?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, we have a number of different sort of pilot projects underway. We have a number of national initiatives underway that kind of capture the different technology requirements that we need. One thing that stands out to us, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, is that a lot of what is done in the smart building industry, or has been done historically, is all focused on day one delivery. So whether that's a new building with a full building intelligence platform, or whatever you want to call it, you know, it gets executed and then the designers walk away, the consultants walk away, the vendor doesn't necessarily walk away, but you don't have the same support structure in place as when the building was live. No one's doing this continuous retro commissioning. You're not doing efficiencies checklist on an ongoing basis. So that day two support of the smart building environment is something that I think is critical, and something that is a challenge right now. So one of our concerns, as I said, with that change management thing, is that we want to deploy a scalable platform, but we want to deploy one that's stable as well, in that, you know, we are a small group of people running a smart building strategy for a whole organization. We can't be held accountable, or we would be challenged to be held accountable for the sustainment of that platform on an ongoing basis. And so what we need is a partner who can deliver a smart building platform and also make sure that it's sustained over however the lifetime of the project. So whether that's integration sustainment, whether that's taking a look at the device connectivity and network health, whether that's looking at API, SDK management, there's so many different facets of that day two sustainment model that I think are not necessarily incorporated into the smart building sort of environment right now. It's something that we certainly are striving for in terms of a partner long-term.
Great,
Blake,
thank you.
Mark Peacock back at you. So one of the things that you mentioned early on in our conversation is the tenant/occupant experience and reducing tenant churn, i.e., you know, they're going to leave because they're not happy with their experience or whatever the case is. Do you guys track the hard numbers, the cost of what it costs you to recruit a new tenant, what it costs for the build out, et cetera, versus, look, by upgrading, doing some smart building technology or whatever you want to, however you want to phrase it, that, and compare the two, that, you know, we saved X dollars by just enhancing our building controls offering or whatever the case is?
I'm sure those metrics do exist from a cost of ownership, a cost of back to base perspective. I'm not sure I do it justice by speaking to it necessarily. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to provide you with a great answer on that front. Yeah.
But I applaud you for thinking, the organization, thinking about the tenant experience as far as losing a tenant. You're trying to do everything you can to maximize the lifetime value of that particular tenant versus, all right, we don't care if they leave, and then look at all these costs that we have to incur, advertising, build out. We got to pay for energy that, you know, we shouldn't be paying for, or whatever, however you figure it out. So.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of downstream benefits to keeping the client happy as well in terms of occupant experience, because a good portion of our operators day to day is addressing concerns or you know, service requests from our clients, whether that's hot cold requests, whether that's odor, whether that's stale air. Many of those things are done manually today. And so we see a strong opportunity there to use technology and data to sort of remove those redundant tasks and enable those people to, instead of addressing client concerns all the time, they can actually spend it addressing root cause for issues instead of just like turning the set point up on that floor by half a degree. So there's kind of the two aspects of that. There's the financial aspect where we don't want to have to go back to base and do more recruiting and things of that nature, but also just reducing the amount of strain on our operations team is a direct benefit of improving the occupant experience.
So, Blake, can you speak to, so we've talked about what within Cadillac Fairview and sort of the relationship, what you need, the wish list from the industry. Could you speak to you and your peers, and whether the sort of the journey that you've seen happen in Cadillac Fairview, are you seeing that in other similar or somewhat similar building owners? And you talk a lot with each other, and is there how the broader landscape, let's put it that way? Speak to that.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I've noticed, and one thing I was very impressed with when I joined the real estate industry, especially here, was that there is a pretty drastic, or not drastic, a pretty substantial amount of information sharing between organizations when it comes to building sustainability and smart technology. So having spoken with other counterparts within Canada, like Quadreal, Oxford, Brookfield, Great West Life, there's a number of Hines, there's a number of real estate owner operators that are undertaking a very similar journey to us. And there's been a lot of best practice sharing as well. I mean, we don't specifically talk about the nuances of our designs or our found, like the vendors that we partner with, the things of that nature, but generally with respect to the vision and the roadmap for deployment of smart building technology, everyone's interested in raising the tide together so that we have, it's all driven by the needs of the market, and the needs of the market are generally driven by the people, right? So we need more resilient assets. We need to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to do all kinds of these things that are going to benefit society as a whole. And so we try to help contribute to that by sharing best practices with the building operators and owners to, as I said, raise the tide.
So is that sort of? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Anto, go ahead.
I was going to say, is that informal, or you work through organizations?
In my experience so far, it's been fairly informal. Just getting together at industry events, sharing information, going out to lunch, whatever it might be. There's a lot of opportunities to do that without a structured information sharing media.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you read and where do you get your information, or your team at Cadillac Fairview?
That's a great question. So there's obviously a lot of research underway at any given time. We leverage a lot of the industry resources, like the Realcomm newsletter for all the information coming out of that. Resources such as this with Monday Live, general sharing of information and best practices between experts and such as yourselves. The Verdantix report is always useful for getting industry insights into the smart building industry. There's a plethora of different information sources that we gain from, and I think collectively they all influence our ability to stay on top of industry trends and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You have a question for us, Blake, that you would like to ask us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just like to understand from this consortium of like esteemed individuals, where you see the smart building industry heading in terms of what are the primary use cases, what are the intended outcomes, and what do you see in terms of delivering this at a large scale?
Well, that is the question that we've been trying to figure out.
There's no right answer, I don't think. I'm just curious to hear the perspective of all of you in terms of where you see this industry heading in terms of the primary business drivers.
Who wants to take a stab at that?
Well, I can start. So I think our thinking is consistent with what your practice is right now in terms of a primary driver being energy reduction. That's kind of historically been one of the things that as an industry we've sold on, we've built products around to accomplish that. I think that we could probably agree as a group here on the screen about a couple of trends, which is more connectivity, more connected products, more IoT-like systems in place, more monitoring, more cloud-based platforms, whether it be storage or the actual applications and analytics and so forth, and a much stronger push towards analytics in terms of looking at portfolios of real estate and so forth. So I'll stop there, but just some trends that I know we've all talked about and generally agree on. So
Yeah, and I think the one word that you missed, Tracy, is the importance of interoperability and
Oh, yes.
the componentization of all of the technology that exists.
And the standardization of that, how things are not just integrating, but really interoperating, right? Slight difference there, but a very important difference.
But so I'll build on that a little bit more, which is data. So you mentioned right at the very beginning, Blake, that data was the big driver. And so we've had almost 2 years now of discussion around how to get owners to appreciate the value of data that these systems now contain and basically have locked up in them tremendous data, which if used or leveraged properly, would further not only the energy savings, but the operational happiness of the facility, if you will. But in order to do that, we've been asking ourselves and asking the industry, okay, what's getting in the way of getting owners to understand that the data is there and it can be used, but two, how do you get access to the data easily? Because that's a whole another ball of wax, and because some of it's just not easily accessible because it's proprietary, or the vendor doesn't want to expose it in an easy way for people to use it. There's the whole idea of whether or not the data is represented with, say, a decent tagging formality that allows you to get past the contractor's point names, and then having to deal with all of that. So we've been trying to identify all these things that are really obstacles to easily accessing the data, so then you can use it for the value that you've already articulated. So that's really a large part of our conversation over the last year and a half, 2 years, is all about data, how to get to it, and then once you have it, what can we do with it to better improve the operation of a building and a portfolio too, because it's not just a building. Because once you have it, if you do it the right way, it's just, in some regards, it's just as easy to manage 100 buildings as it is one, if the data is well represented, well organized.
There's some comments from Tristan that's basically along the same lines on interoperability, and if you can comment on that, Blake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can address all of them in one go. Actually, the foundation of our smart building journey is predicated upon the ability to get data out of our systems and contextualize that with IoT to be able to drive either analytical insights or automation. And so, to your point, from an enterprise perspective, we have to look at what are some scalable and sustainable ways to be able to leverage data from our buildings that aren't predicated on, like siloed systems like various different BAS, and how do we unlock data from those systems in a way that doesn't necessarily lock us into a certain vendor or lock us into a certain framework. And so when we look at it from a holistic portfolio perspective to say, we have 9 BAS, we have 6 elevator manufacturers. We need a platform that is completely data agnostic, that can ingest data and write data back to whatever endpoint system that exists in a way that's scalable. So that's where the normalization comes in. And so we're looking right now at various different ontologies to standardize on one that might be the most applicable for these cases that we want to achieve, whether that's real estate core, DTDL, Google ontology, whatever that might be, on top of already looking at our brick schema data point tagging at the building site level. So there's a lot of different nuances around this, but I think the most critical aspect and the most foundational element of our smart building journey is establishing this ecosystem of data connectivity across the entire portfolio, something that we call connected enterprise.
So we're at the top of the hour. And Mark, I know you were wanting to say something. Do you want to wrap this up and make your closing comments, and we can wrap the show?
Sure. So I think, first of all, Blake, thank you on behalf of Monday Live Group and all the attendees that joined us today. Greatly appreciated. Valuable insight. I wish we could have another 3 or 4 hours together, because I don't think we'd stop. But one of the key things that I got out of your conversation with us is Cadillac Fairview has approached this whole smarter building perspective from a business perspective, and that the technology side is the enabler. And I think more and more owners, operators, people like y'all selves, that's how the conversation is beginning to change. And I believe that's the way the conversation will get more of the technologies and solutions that we bring to the table further adopted and so forth. But again, fascinating conversation. Great, appreciate it.
Thank you,
Absolutely,
Mark.
yeah. I want
And,
to say big thanks as well. I don't know if I don't necessarily did it justice on the Cadillac Fairview side, so I appreciate you giving me a platform here. And I agree. I think we could talk for hours longer. So I appreciate the great conversation here. This has been highly informative and quite fun to talk about as well. So thanks for everyone for your
yeah,
time.
and obviously we'd like to continue this conversation, not just with you, but with your peers. So look forward to that as well. So thank you for being with us, and thanks everybody for being here on the call, and attendees as well. And we'll get the recording of this up the next couple of days. Other than that, hopefully everybody has a great week, the rest of this week. So wonderful.
Sounds great. Thanks. And if you could, Anto, if you could just share the comments in the chat as well, maybe I can address some of them offline if need be.
I'll do that. I'll do that after.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
Blake,
so
you
much,
can always
Blake.
come back to us if you have future questions or needs too.
Yeah.
All of us would be happy.
Much
to help.
appreciated. We'll do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye bye.
now.
Thanks very much.
Bye,
Have a great
bye.
day.
Bye bye.